G'day everyone. Today I am talking with Ryan Dinse and Charlie Ormond. They write the Alpha Tech Trader letter. Earlier this week in Insider, I was talking about NVIDIA and whether it was eating the world with its huge earnings beat that it came through with late last week. Hugely profitable company, and it is benefiting from a massive capital expenditure boom going on in the States at the moment. So I wanted to sit down with Ryan and Charlie to dig a little bit more deeply into it. I call it AI for Dummies purely because I am pretty ill-educated in the world of tech and AI, but I'm interested in what it all means and how things might unfold from here. So hopefully I ask enough simple questions that break some of the concepts down into more digestible forms, and hopefully you'll find it really useful and enlightening as well. Ryan, Charlie, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
We are talking about NVIDIA and AI, and the reason why we're doing that is because I don't really understand what the hell's going on. This is one of the, I guess, craziest moments in stock market history in terms of a company that has delivered a massive boost in earnings, and everyone's talking about, is it a bubble? But when you look at the earnings, those earnings are real. So it's not really so much about, is NVIDIA a buy or is it a sell, or we're in a bubble or not. It's trying to understand what this actually means for the future of tech. I consider this an AI for Dummies investment, and I'm being the dummy, you being the expert. So hopefully I'll ask some questions that sound stupid and our members can get a lot out of it, because I'm assuming if I'm in the boat that I don't really understand what's going on, then I guess a lot of our members will be in the same boat. So let me start just by talking about a few of the stats that NVIDIA just rattled off in terms of their 2024 earnings. So for the year, 60 billion in revenue, 73% gross margins, which are incredible. Operating expenses of 11 billion, which was only up 2% relative to their revenues, up 126%. And that translated into a net income of 581% increase, which was a 30 billion net income. So that's incredible numbers for one company, especially considering 12 months ago, people like me were saying, oh, you know, maybe this is the peak for their earnings, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger in terms of their earnings. So I'll just start by repeating something they put in their annual report, and then we can maybe start breaking it down, and you can tell me what it all means. So it says, we specialize in markets where our computing platforms can provide tremendous acceleration for applications. These platforms incorporate processes, interconnects, software, algorithms, systems, and services to deliver unique value. Our platforms address 4 large markets where our expertise is critical: data center, gaming, professional visualization, and automotive. Now, obviously the one that's making most of the money here is the data center side of things. So I'll start asking the question, what is it they're actually selling? A lot of people think they're just selling computer chips.
They're selling a dream. Now, it's important to understand the history of NVIDIA a little bit. So there's a lot of chip makers around in the US and elsewhere, but NVIDIA made a name for themselves being a specialist in a certain type of chip called a GPU, which is a graphical processor basically.
And that was in the video game segment.
That's the video game segment, yeah. So they were making chips that made video games. You see all the graphics in video games, they're really good these days. They kept on making chips that were better and better, allowed computer games to be more realistic and better. And so they specialized in that area, which is a pretty decent market in of itself. So they were doing pretty well on that. Other companies, say like Intel, focused more on the CPU market, was the different type of microchip, which was not as good for graphics, but good for other stuff like processing, the usual standard type of data. So a lot of companies weren't really in the GPU space as much as NVIDIA was. There are some companies, but NVIDIA was the market leader in that space.
So would it be fair to say that a GPU is a more powerful processor because it needed to...
Without getting too technical on it, it's less about the power, it's more about parallel compute. Yeah. So AI requires this thing called matrix multiplication because of the way neural nets are shaped, which is kind of like a branching tree. So each branch requires compute that scales on the next one. So that parallel compute that you needed from GPUs, so when they would process graphics to make 3D models, you need that parallel computing to make the 3D model. It just worked by coincidence. So they were kind of just lucky, really.
So then Gen AI hits, ChatGPT comes to the fore last year, and suddenly everyone sees this generative AI thing where, AI can appear human-like in conversations, you can do text-to-image commands, it makes it very easy to get a computer to do something and to interact with it. That sort of took the world by storm. If you remember when ChatGPT launched, it was 0 to 100 million users in a matter of, I think it was weeks, could have been a few months, couple of months, but it was really fast, and it's off the chart when you see other technologies, how long it took to reach 100 million users. This was really fast. So that was the first signal that, this type of AI is something real, and everyone got excited about it. And then suddenly everyone realized NVIDIA had, as Charlie explained, had the perfect microchips for that. And it was a coincidence to a degree, but if you ever listen to the CEO Jensen Huang, he said they've been looking at AI for a long time. So they did understand the crossover. The circumstances might have been a bit fortuitous. OpenAI, Sam Altman's company, reached this sort of tipping point, and Microsoft were a big investor in it, and it sort of like snowballed from there. But as it stands right now, NVIDIA has the microchips and the specialization and the expertise in that type of microchip and network sort of systems that everyone wants right now, because they're all trying to create new AI models and AI-driven programs, and to do that, they need these chips. And right now, you can't just spin up these chips from nowhere. So even a company like Intel or Samsung, they can't just go, we'll create the same chip. It's not a sausage factory. Yeah. It's a process of retooling. It's a very technical thing, making microchips, investment and all that stuff. So it could take them a couple of years to
There's a lot of intellectual capital in that,
Yeah, they've got a real head start.
They've got a head start. And so for now, there's this huge uplift in demand. They've got all the supply, and that's why, as you just pointed out, their earnings margins have blown out, their revenue's gone up, and they've got customers all over the world that need their chips right now if they want to play in the AI space coming forward.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add on to that, so we're talking about the data centers as being the main source of their revenue. The reason why that's important right now is the big players are spending huge sums of money to get their data centers kind of to this high level of power, because at this point, the bleeding edge of AI, data is the big thing where they're seeing a struggle. So from where GPT-4 is right now to the next potential thing, they're saying that we're going to need maybe 5 orders of magnitude more data to process within there. So 5 orders of magnitude might not sound like a huge amount. That's 100,000 times more data, which we don't have. Like, by next year, we've probably maxed out the publicly available data on the internet for these large language models to actually improve on themselves. And so a whole bunch of different techniques are going to be required. One of those is being the ability to process new data. So that's why everyone is buying these new chips, so they can process more data.
So a couple of questions from that. Let's start with the basics. What is a large language model?
All right, a large language model essentially is, what's the easiest way to describe it?
Remember, this is AI for Dummies.
Essentially, don't say matrix multiplication.
yeah. Avoid the
neural networks.
Essentially, the easiest way to put it.
What's an example of a large language model at the moment that people might be able to?
The easiest way I could put it, because there's a lot of different examples of them, is they are models which predict the next word. Right?
Okay.
It doesn't. Okay. It's as simple as that. If you break it down to the complete basic thing, it's just a system of neural networks. We can skip what that means. A very complicated collection of data, which looks at a sentence and then predicts the next word in that sentence.
So like predictive text.
Like predictive text in a very complicated way. Yep. So for every next word that's added, so let's say it's the quick brown fox jumps over the, and then it adds lazy, it'll look at that sentence again and then make the prediction again. Every time it adds a new word, it looks at the thing again, adds another word on top of that. Right. And it's kind of funny that just from that predict the next word, you get, an emergent intelligence. Now, it's not general intelligence, it's not using reasoning, which is a really important distinction from AGI, which we can get into later, but essentially it's just, what's the next word in this sentence?
And is that where things like predictions of what's your favorite song on Spotify, or predictions of what shows do you like on Netflix, is that where that type of intelligence
it's actually a different kind of algorithm. So those those
And is that considered a form of AI, or is that just basic computing?
Yeah, no, it's certainly a form of AI. Prior to ChatGPT, GPT in itself is a generative pre-made transformer, which is a type of AI, very specific, which is into these large language models. Doesn't really matter what that means, but essentially that is a very new type of AI. Older ones, like the ones that predicted where you'd go next in your driving for Google, or what your recommended songs would be, are using different types of data which is not language based.
Right, okay.
Right. So the language specific part of this was something that didn't work for a really long time. They scaled up their compute to a certain level, and then all of a sudden it turned on and was great. And then these transformers came along, made it even better, and then large language models kind of emerged out of that. And emerged is a really important part of this, because it was surprised even the people that made it.
Gotcha. And so when you say that there's not enough data, what does that mean? Because everyone would normally think the world is swimming in data, and that's all there is.
The entire civilization of data. If you think about how you would predict the next word, you would use the entire corpus of what you'd find on the internet, right? You would say, everything I've seen on the internet says the next word is most likely that. If you just made an AI which said, predict the next word which is most statistically likely, it would make a very dumb, a very boring, very unoriginal AI that would just spit out bland text that no one would want to read. There is an element within this very complicated algorithm which doesn't just say this is the next most likely word. It actually uses a mathematical system which emulates reasoning or emulates some form of creativity. And that's the best we've got at this moment. It's not actually doing reasoning, it's just kind of we're mimicking it through math. Okay. And so the restrictions on that kind of emulation, again, stop me if I'm getting too technical or sounding too boring, is that you need a lot of connections to a lot of different points of information. So if I want to make a new sentence and I have to rely on looking at everything that everyone has ever written and putting that into an AI that everyone can use, it's going to require extremes amounts of data, like extremes amounts. Everything has to be original, and you have to pull that from what we've got so far. You have to have enough points to realize where the gaps are. So interpolation, they call it.
Right. So going back to NVIDIA's head start in all this, I remember I was either reading or listening to something, and I can't recall the actual year this happened, but in the early days when NVIDIA was effectively a graphics company, apparently some scientist was working on a problem, and he would have to feed this data in, and his CPU would take a long time to process the data, and he would spend hours waiting for it to come back with the answer. And apparently his son said to him, "Dad, why don't you go down to the local computer shop and pick up a GPU chip and try using that? It's a lot quicker. I use it for my video games." So he did that, and then he apparently wrote Jensen a letter from NVIDIA and said, "Hey, your chips have just increased my compute power, and now I'm getting the results back from my experiments in half an hour rather than waiting 2 days," or something like that. So this was the first seed that I think Jensen had, that hang on, we've got something here that we can maybe use for this emerging AI. So it sort of goes to show that they were way ahead of the pack. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make, and I certainly made when I was first looking at NVIDIA, is saying these guys got huge margins, huge returns on capital. Capitalism works in a way that these things get competed away. This will get competed away. And since then, they've gone on to double their market cap, double their earnings, and no one can see where they could be taken out. Do you guys have have an ability to explain just how entrenched they are in this world? So why can't? So at the moment, you've got Meta, which is Facebook, Google, let's say Amazon. They're actually buying. They're actually spending huge amounts of money on NVIDIA. Who are NVIDIA's competitors? Is it AMD? Is it Intel? Yep. And are they anywhere near?
Samsung.
Yeah,
there's a few different ones.
The big ones on the horizon at the moment are AMD and Intel. But I mean, with the latest news, if NVIDIA is accelerating the generation after the current GPU is coming, that's already meant that AMD's cancelled its next iteration.
So they're constantly behind.
Yeah. And they just don't have the spend, and they don't have the supply agreements like NVIDIA do.
And we should point out, NVIDIA do have pretty solid agreements with, what's the Taiwanese semiconductor?
TSMC. He's best friends with the owner, or the old previous owner.
They
are like they're
how capitalism
they
works.
are inseparable. Those two, they've given each other.
But he's Jensen is Taiwanese as well.
Yeah, exactly. They've given each other doctorates. They go to each other's family meetings. Like they are completely intertwined for a number of years.
Is his sister not the CEO of another competing?
Yeah,
is it ARM?
ARM.
Yeah, Jensen's sister is CEO of another chip making company called ARM.
Yeah, but for a number of years, Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, he's been aggressively controlling the supply space. And that was especially noticeable during COVID, where a lot of other companies were well behind the curve in terms of getting their supply agreements. Currently, NVIDIA has it's like $11.5 billion worth of supply agreements and another $4 billion in prepaid supply agreements. So they completely dominate that space over a huge amount. And of course, making a semiconductor is the most complicated thing on the earth to make. You're talking about literal billions of transistors and a bunch of different supply agreements.
And it's probably worth pointing out there that TSMC, the Taiwanese manufacturer, so the chip industry isn't just, there's different components of it.
Yep.
So TSMC specialize in making the microchips, actually producing them, right?
Yep.
But a company like AMD, for example, they don't make their own chips. They design them, and you come up with creative ways of making chips, but then they outsource it to TSMC, and TSMC have this market-leading position in making microchips because it is such a costly, capital-intensive, complicated process, and they're the trusted manufacturer. I think
Samsung is another
one. Intel are trying to get into it because there's the whole story of bringing microchip making, the process making back to America. That's a story playing out too. And Intel are one of the companies trying to do that. But yeah, you've got to think NVIDIA itself, they don't make their chips either. Yeah. So TSMC actually is an interesting company there that has a quasi-monopoly in making this stuff as well.
Yeah, they call it a foundry. So So it's interesting that, as you mentioned, Intel, they have gone back to the foundry model as part of their kind of reboot. It's not the first time they've done this, and they've been unsuccessful every other time, but it kind of shows you how far they think they are behind NVIDIA. That they're like, well, we can't compete on design, so we've got to be the open supply chain. So now they are going to be making chips for their competitors.
So where are they up to in that? Because this was part of, we've heard a bit about onshoring in the past few years, where they're bringing back manufacturing of these things to the US. There is a big plan under construction.
It's called the CHIPS Act.
CHIPS
Act. I think
so it's just shy of 290 billion over a decade. I think there's 5 billion that's been put into a big research chip center.
I think Intel might be on the 15 billion. That could be right. I think the Intel could be getting 15 billion through the CHIPS Act, basically to help build these foundries in America, essentially. Yeah. So they're getting subsidized by the American government because of the strategic risk of TSMC in Taiwan, China there. They don't want something to happen there because that is like a critical part of the microchip ecosystem. TSMC, though, I think they've put some new foundries in Japan, or they're starting to diversify their geographical risk as well. So I suppose the point is, as you can see, it's a pretty complex ecosystem with a lot of moving parts. And when you look at something like NVIDIA, a lot of people's natural reaction is bubble, and there could be elements of that for sure, but there's also an element of smart strategic planning, monopoly type characteristics, which give them a decent head start in this really fast growing tech space. Yep. I think over the next 2 years it will be, can anyone catch up and make inroads? And there are companies trying, there are ones trying. I didn't know that AMD had cancelled plans, but I knew there was other chips companies trying to try. And also, how can NVIDIA diversify their own business model to take advantage of that head start? Because if you fast forward in 5 years, if all they were doing was just producing GPUs, probably someone would catch up with them, or at least eat into their margins. It'll be interesting to see what they try to do with this head start they've got with the capital they are getting right now. Can they go into data centers? I think that's something they've floated they might do. They might run their own data centers, which they haven't done really that much in the past. And they might try other things. They might even do AI programming, or they talked about networking in that quote that you did there. Yep. Or they might do M&A. There's a lot of moving parts in that. So when people say bubble, I would say, I don't know what the valuation of NVIDIA is, if it's a bubble or not. What I do know is that it's a sign that the AI disruption is real, because the earnings are real, the revenue is real, and you can see the sheer pace of demand coming from big companies that clearly see a future where this stuff is really important. So Meta, Apple, Google, all those companies. So I think that's the takeaway when I look at NVIDIA. It's not ever trying to value or does this make sense valuation, because I honestly don't know. But I do know that the fundamentals there are showing that the AI thing is real, and then
absolutely. And I think this is part of the concept that I wanted to explore today. And you just mentioned the word bubble, and I think if you look at a share price chart without knowing anything else, you think that's looking pretty bubblish. But when you look at the earnings that are underpinning that, you think, okay, fair enough. And as you say, if you put those numbers into a model, you probably actually get a higher valuation than what is there now.
Interesting, just before you go on that point, after their earnings last week, almost every broker doubled their share price target. I know that doesn't mean much, but they doubled their share price target on NVIDIA from about 750 to 1400. It wasn't just usually when brokers change their targets incremental. They're always trying to catch the momentum, and they might increase it $50 either way. But in this time, almost all of them doubled it to 1400.
But this is the power of for people who might think that's just insane. This is the power of compounding at high numbers. If you are reinvesting nearly 100% of your earnings and you're generating 80-90% return on those reinvested earnings, you put those numbers into your model, the valuation goes all the way up here. So I can see where that comes from. But the question I want to pose is, are we in a capex bubble in terms of these companies like Meta, like Google, thinking, if I don't spend on these chips, I'm going to be left behind in this race? And I think the analogy that I've read before is that this is effectively a similar type of situation to the railway boom, where everyone wanted to lay down tracks, and sometimes there were just too many tracks laid down, and that's why there were so many people went bust in the aftermath of that. Are we in a similar situation now where companies are spending because if they don't spend, they will be left behind, but if they do spend, they give themselves a chance to stay in this new race?
I think there's an element of that in the sense that they have to play in this space because they know the risk if they don't, and it turns out to be something that is as disruptive as the internet, then they become obsoleted in much the same way as the companies they made obsolete were. They don't want to be the future Yellow Pages or the future Blockbuster Video. So they are investing a lot in this space because everyone else is and they sort of need to. But the flip side of that, there is a valuation component for them to keep in mind. So say someone like Microsoft, for example, they've got Windows Office software everywhere. They've got a gaming component as well, but they've got software in almost every enterprise in the world, right? And what they believe through products like Copilot and that is that they can introduce heaps of efficiencies to almost every sector and every company on the world. So that's a massive total addressable market. They think the power of AI, generative AI, can make companies a lot more efficient, bring down costs. McKinsey put out a report last year which estimated generative AI could save the economy anywhere between $2 trillion and $4 trillion a year. Yeah. So the equation Microsoft's doing right now is they're investing money to make these capabilities possible with the view that they'll be able to charge customers higher amounts later to get access to the AI products. And these companies will be happier to pay higher amounts because they're saving them, all these costs. Yeah. So if I can reduce your cost by 50%, you would pay me 10% to do that, wouldn't you? Yeah. So that's the equation sort of someone like Microsoft is maybe doing. Apple and Meta might have another take on it. They might be looking at it more as a creative platform where app developers and people that use their products can create the next TikTok, create the next Facebook, create the next social media boom, and do it on their platforms. And so they want to open up the tools for developers to do that. I'm not sure if they'd have quite the same view as Microsoft. That they're
just on Google, and you wrote about this in the Tech Alpha Tech Trader. I think it was last week. I think Google has a risk in terms of their dominance over search, right? I mean, this is where the new, and I'm not sure what the right word is. It a generative AI or the ones where you put in a search term at the moment. If you put a question into ChatGPT, you get a much better answer than what you do if you put it into Google.
Exactly. I'll let Charlie answer this in a second, but I'll just give you a personal example. When I open up my computer now at home, my laptop, Bing comes up. Microsoft search engine comes up automatically now, so not Google. It defaults to Bing. And there's a thing that says Copilot right there, and it even defaults to Copilot. So if I just
Copilot, just to be clear, is
Copilot's Microsoft's AI program, and it's part of that is the search engine, right? There's more components to it, but part of that is a new search engine where instead of just typing in, say, holidays to Bali or whatever, like you would in Google, and it'll just throw up a bunch of websites. I could type into Copilot, find me the cheapest flight to Bali, and it'll give me a list of responses from different companies. It's a different way of searching, and search hasn't been disrupted since Google overtook it. I'll let Charlie get into the figures, but I think my point is Microsoft, with a dominant position in, say, laptops and stuff like that, are starting to introduce default settings that drive people to their products. And in the past, when it went to Bing, I probably wouldn't use it because I didn't like the Bing search engine. I would still type Google, and I would move to Google. But with Copilot, sometimes I just use it because it actually throws me up some really interesting answers. But yeah, I think the figures behind this.
A lot of this came out because of the antitrust lawsuit that's going on in the US against Google, because they have such a monopoly on this space.
What would their market share in search be?
It's just below 90%. It used to be 90%, but it's been 90% for decades, right? And it's just come down. I think it's 88% now. And so that's pretty significant considering Microsoft has pumped $100 billion into Bing in the last kind of 5 years.
Can I just quickly ask a related question on that? Is this, I heard something that Elon Musk got together with a few people, that was the genesis of ChatGPT, to try and break this dominance. Was it of Google, or was it of the large?
I don't know if it was Musk. I think Musk has been in the background in a few of these stories, but I've never really heard anything where it's concrete, him being like the instigator for this. But he certainly likes.
But I know he worked with Sam Altman in the early stages of ChatGPT, right? And then when it was a not-for-profit.
I think it's actually quite funny. The Google DeepMind, a lot of those guys are probably more influential than Musk. So it's Google, and they've admitted it recently. So it's a lot of the Google founders.
Internal sabotage.
Yeah, the Google founders were the actually people that really helped GPT kick off, which is kind of funny.
And so what do you think its likelihood of not cannibalizing, but taking down the market?
They are so hungry to do it, because for every % of market share that they can take away from Google, that's $200 billion in search.
200 billion?
$2 billion.
$2 billion.
Wow. $2 billion in revenue US for them for each year. So that's quite a bit they can pull out.
In advertising
revenue, sorry, yes. So that's pretty significant. In this point, it's been useless until now. No one has cared about that. They argued in the antitrust lawsuit that it was because of the defaulting, as you were talking about earlier, about that everyone is just habitually on Google because it's default on all of your devices. So they're now starting to scrap that. And now with the idea of Copilot, the idea is that instead of you going onto Google to search for a question, you just instead use these services, and they're able to comb the internet. I think if you look forward into the future of what the internet may be, it might become more and more useful, because more and more AI will be writing more and more less or dubious information on the internet, and so you'll rely on AI to tell you information. Because if you just Google what the top search is, search engine optimization and all these kind of funny things that AI do, you get a lot of rubbish back. So you might have to rely on AI for better
There's a political component to this as well. I wrote about it in Fat Tail Daily this week. Google has caused a bit of a stir. I don't know if you heard about this, because they've overlaid their AI search model or AI model with certain social diversity things, and it's spitting out things that don't make sense in the real world. Like, for example, someone typed in "show me an image of a Viking," and it produced a black Viking, and then it said "show me an image of the Pope," and it did a female Pope. There's never been a female Pope, and people have said they're overlaying this woke thing. And there's a lot of examples, like they will refuse to show white people in certain contexts. The founding fathers, they show like Native American, like things like that, which. Fine, you understand their philosophy, but people are saying they've indoctrinated their AI, which is meant to be an independent arbiter of information.
It's like having a modern university education.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, someone said that on Twitter, said it's like they've put the blue-haired HR lady in charge of the AI or something. That's obviously a bit political in itself, saying it like that. But the point is, this is blown up on Twitter, and Elon Musk has. Again, there's Musk again, he stirred the pot with that. But you've had venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen, famous venture capitalist, saying this isn't just a Google AI issue, this is endemic to Google as a corporation. They've been gatekeeping information and doing this in the background for years, because they're no longer founder-led, they've been very corporatized. Yep. And so this has opened the door, I think, to competing products like people that say, look, whether you agree with that political viewpoint or not, you don't want to have it jammed down your throat. If I want to pitch for a Viking, I want to pitch for a Viking. You know, I don't want someone to overlay it. And the way that a company as big as Google could roll out something so badly done, you should see, there's so many examples of it. So it's like a worrying sign as well.
Right?
Yeah, and so that has opened the gate for someone like, I don't know if Microsoft would be any better in that regard, but it has opened the gate for competing products, both new innovative open source models and Microsoft models and other things. And I think that is exciting because, as Charlie said, search has been dominated by Google for so long. But do we really want the future to be dominated by one company gatekeeping information?
Well, it comes back to my original question about the railroads. Not everyone succeeded. There was a lot that went into it, and a lot thought that it was create productivity benefits because you get from one place to the other quicker, and it saves time, it saves money. But when everyone tries to compete for that, there are going to be losers, and I guess that's going to be, the thing I'm interested in reading your stuff going forward is to try to work out how this is unfolding. Who are the players that are getting the advantages? Obviously, right now it's NVIDIA, and by the sound of things, they have a good, probably 3-year at least lead on this business. And just another thing on that, there was something else I had written down here that I'm not sure if anyone's capable of answering, because again, it comes down to like quite a technical sounding thing, but. It says, while our approach starts with powerful chips, what makes it a full stack computing platform is our large body of software, including the CUDA parallel programming model. The CUDA X collection of acceleration libraries, APIs, SDKs, and domain-specific application frameworks. And from what my limited research tells me is that NVIDIA's created a system a bit like the Apple operating system, where all the developers come in and work on the Apple platform, which gives the Apple platform value, and everyone uses that.
Yeah.
So this is another form of moat that NVIDIA's created.
That's a great way
of
putting it, actually.
Yeah, they have really been pushing this down the throat of all of the people they've been servicing because their GPUs are in such high demand. They've even done a thing where they're making people who want to buy their high-end GPUs buy their worst GPUs, just so they can guarantee that they have supply of the larger ones.
But can you break it down for me just a little bit? So you buy a GPU.
Yep.
But how does that bring them into an ecosystem of NVIDIA?
It's slightly technical, but simply put, most computing networks and all of the compute and all the things that go behind it for most businesses is under a thing called Ethernet. What NVIDIA has is a thing called Infinity Band, which is their own style of walled garden networking. And with that, they then sell you the optical switches and transceivers and the specific software that runs on that and all of the parts in between, right? So like in the last quarter, something that was kind of overlooked by a lot of people was their optical transceivers sales tripled, right? Not because they're the best, because they force people to buy them. They have to buy them, exactly. And so the other companies are responding. There's things like the Ultra Ethernet Consortium, which is made up of kind of all of its competitors. Microsoft, Cisco, ANET, all of these other people are trying to keep up with them, but essentially because they're forcing people to come within their walled garden, a lot like Apple, they are just guaranteeing themselves sales on all these other things which aren't guaranteed. Now, is that going to be sustainable? I don't think it is. I think that the other systems like Ethernet have such a low cost and such a huge saturation in the rest of the market because it's what everyone else is using. And all those gains that they're getting with the use of AI at the moment might see some slight loss just from new architectures and new things like that. But essentially, all of those very technical things boil down to them just saying you have to be within us if you want to get the newest and greatest. There might be some loss with that when you're looking at Intel's latest system and AMD's latest next generation. It should be coming out in the next few months. I think I heard 3 months, and those will be on par with the H100, which is NVIDIA's fastest chip, essentially. But the generation after that, they're well ahead. They're well ahead.
And let's talk a little bit about the investment cycle. So, at the moment, clearly everyone's throwing money at the chips in order to get in the world of AI. How long do they last for? And when do these companies have to say, I've got to go and spend again to upgrade? What's the cycle?
There's a little bit of a weird story with this. There's a great book I'd recommend, Chris Miller's Chip Wars. He did a bunch of work on this before GPT kind of blew up, and then he became the man on the spot and the know. But essentially, because of the foundry model, and everyone has to go to these TMCs or these Samsungs to get their chips made, there's been a huge competition for that supply, and so that's where NVIDIA has a huge advantage because they have this long-standing relationship with them and a huge supply agreement. But there is a little bit of a weird story in which, firstly, there's the US influence of the CHIPS Act, so they banned China from working with people like TSMC, restricted their size of the transistors they can use.
Did China have any foundries that were supplying US companies, or is that not really their specialty?
Not really their specialty. They don't have really many on the foundries. They just, again, had designs they would send to TSMC, and TSMC would send them back chips.
Yep.
The US restricted something from 5 nanometers, which is pretty small. You know, that's like 20 times smaller than a virus in terms of that's how small transistors are going. Yep. The next generation is called a 3 nanometer transistor. The difference and the kind of complication in the story is that from 5 to 3 has seen a lot of issues. Right? There's issues with shrinkage on the chips. There's a lot of technical things that have gone wrong with that, which means that everyone's kind of gone back and doubled down on the 5. Hence why AMD cancelled its competing one to NVIDIA for the future, because they saw there was so many issues and they couldn't compete on cost and on paper. So with the combination of China being banned out of this, they are now saturating the lower end of the market. So let's say the bigger, 5 and up transistors, so the larger and less complex ones, whereas the newer generation is kind of ramming itself against the 5 to try and push that as far as it can. Yep. You might see competitors like Intel have some advantage in here where they've got new systems where they're 3D stacking them and things like that. It's kind of complicated, there's so many different things that go into it, but essentially everyone is trying to come up with a new architecture that can make the 5 go further, and that's where we're seeing right now NVIDIA winning. There might be disruption in the future as we move into smaller and smaller transistors, but for now, with the current technical issues they're having with them, it's NVIDIA's game.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of the time. One question I wanted to ask is energy. I guess this new form of computing power is very energy intensive. Do you think windmills and sunshine is going to power this new energy architecture, or is there what's the
Microsoft has
there?
already put plans in for nuclear reactors in their data centers.
Wow!
So they're already on that case. They understand.
What's the cost? The cooling cost is it 40%?
Yeah, 40%.
40% of a data center's costs are cooling the machines, basically.
Yeah,
40%.
Yeah, it's a huge amount.
It's a huge amount. So the person who's actually ahead of this game is Meta. Meta is doing great work at liquid cooling to try and bring those costs down because they understand. Whereas Google went the other way a number of years ago and just did passive cooling, right? So you can't go into the server rooms because they're at 90 degrees C. Wow. And they're just giant holes and they passively. So there's different ways you can go bounce this problem, but
even at that level, we're talking 40% costs at the moment.
Yeah, on cooling, on keeping those machines cool enough. When you put in your computer, you hear the fan whirling around. It's that, but computers going really hard, creating a lot of heat. And they need to keep them cool. There's a lot of different techniques. It'd be interesting to see what technologies there are on that emerging. But I think like you said though, the key thing is like we've got a few picks in that space, and one of them had an issue with energy supply, and that caused a bit of downtime and caused a bit of revenue loss. So I think most of these big data centers will want secure energy. Microsoft doing nuclear is an interesting takeaway.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But the energy use is immense. They need a lot of energy, and again, nuclear makes sense to someone like is it Microsoft, especially if they're trying to do it in a carbon neutral way, which a lot of them do. Nuclear is the only way you can really do that and maintain a guarantee of energy uses and have low costs over the longer term. Big capital costs again at the start, but lower ongoing costs.
That's an understatement. They're spending the equivalent of an aircraft carrier on these data centers. They're $10 billion a pop. The size of these new ones they're designing.
And this probably goes on to my next question. We hear a lot about the cloud, and you upload your photos into the cloud. The cloud is essentially data centers, right? And that's where all the data lives. So you're saying that Microsoft, well, actually, I'll go back to NVIDIA. NVIDIA, do they have data centers, or they just sell into other people's data centers?
They're building out their data centers, but they're also
used to
both.
really, did they?
No, they're new to the game with it, for sure.
Right. So they would tool your data center for you, essentially provide it with all the bits and bobs we talked about if you were building one. But yeah, as Charlie says, they are starting to run their own or co-located data centers where they might own it with someone else.
Their strategy, they define it as a three-pronged strategy, and it's kind of high risk, but they understand that they have a limited window with the GPUs to be ahead, and they want to kind of transition into be one of those kind of Apples, those Googles. So they've moved with all this money, and they're spending in a huge amount of directions to try and just, insert themselves.
So right now the main cloud providers are Amazon.
Yep, Amazon
Google?
is well ahead.
Amazon Web Services.
Is Meta? You just Microsoft. Sorry,
Microsoft.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are there any other major players? I mean, NVIDIA are moving into it, but you're talking about.
There's a lot of smaller players.
But the three big ones.
They're the three big ones.
Okay.
AWS, Amazon's Web Services, is the largest. Yeah,
but it strikes me as a business that is it should be a scalable business, right? So is this something that the market is moving towards 3 or 4 big players rather than a fragmented market?
There is niches within data. Not all data centers are the same. So we've been talking about AI-driven demand, but there is a demand for just traditional data centers, which there's trade-offs. So stuff like latency, like how fast your data can get from devices and back. Some applications don't need AI-type processing, but they need really fast latency. They need to go back and forward really fast. There's other niche ones that we've got one on our books actually, which specializes in high-performance computing, which requires a different architecture of a data center. There's a company out in Perth, I think, as well. Can't remember the name of it right now, but they specialize in Doug Technology. One I picked for an exponential stock investor a while ago, doing really well. They specialize in high performance computing, and they're actually specializing in the oil and gas industry. They've got a product that's doing pretty well, I think.
Yeah, they're like cleaning up seismic data.
Yeah,
using
cleans up seismic data
really
using.
interesting.
Yeah, so really interesting. They're doing pretty well, and they were based out of Perth, and they had some cooling technology as well, I think. So there's a lot of niches within the data center thing. So it's not a one size fits all. So that provides opportunities for different players to find different niches within that.
Yeah.
As well.
But what drags people into the larger players is that, well, you say you join an Amazon, well, then you have access to the AIs and you have access to all those things. So it's kind of inadvertently the cloud push came first. And then now all these smaller businesses are seeing these huge advantages because they're like, well, now I'm part of Google's cloud. I now have access to all of Google's different services. And so it's naturally drag more and more people into that cloud.
Worth pointing out, not all companies use the cloud either. Like I think the penetration rate on large enterprises might be in the 60% somewhere. So it's big and it's trended up for years. But a lot of companies want to have control of their own data. They don't want to trust somewhere else. Small businesses are more likely to use the cloud just for the headache involved in running your own networks, a nightmare.
It's also super agile. If you're a small business and all of a sudden you become popular and you can scale up overnight, it's so much easier.
And that's where the AI thing is interesting again, though, because as Charlie said, if you want to use AI services, you're unlikely to do that on your own network. You will want to use the cloud. It'll just make it far easier. So you could see big businesses move from 60% adoption to closer to 80 or above, as long as they could be satisfied with certain, redundancy and privacy issues. So you might see a growth in the demand for cloud-hosted data centers as well.
It's also, if you think about it, it's a big ask for a company that wants to house all its own data, and I understand that data is very important, but let's say 2 years ago you spent $10 million on a bunch of GPUs. They were the A100s, they were the fastest at the time. Well, the newest ones are 30 times faster at recalling the data, 9 times faster at training your AI. So you've just spent all this money, and then in 2 years
plus an IT team to look after it and all that.
And then all of a sudden you're well behind the game.
But so I guess that's the to me that is so the way I look at and tech is very, very different to how I look at traditional valuation. But at the end of the day, any company generates value via the return on its invested capital. And if we're talking about companies that are spending billions to upgrade their chips, and then 2 years later they need to spend those billions again in order to stay ahead, at what point does their returns on capital start to suffer?
But that's why they use stuff like the cloud to do it, because the cloud can do that in a more cost-effective manner. A centralized data center that does all that for you can get better deals on equipment. The upgrade cycle might be every 3 or 4 years, not every 2 years. All that. So they've got economies of scale. Yeah. And then for the end user, there's different models of paying. You can have models depending on your data use and stuff like that, subscription models, and so you can scale up or scale down, so you've got some flexibility. So the equation comes back to not what a company doing it, because yeah, that is a hard ask to retool every 2 years. But for a data center, it's different. It's like, what's the extra value I can extract from this customer base, given that I'm providing them a better product, essentially. And if the better, as I said before, if the better product is saving money on the individual user side of things through efficiencies of AI, if McKinsey's $2 trillion to $4 trillion figures right, the data centers can take some of that as their profit, and that makes their return on invested capital worth it. But yeah, that's unknown how that'll play out and the timeline that'll play out as well. And there are a lot of companies racing in. I read recently that Australian Super had invested $5 billion in some big European data center. There's smaller players doing it. There's a lot of people investing money into it, and we probably won't know the returns in the short term for another 12, 24 months. But if those returns are worth it, then the race continues, you know what I mean?
It's a fair critique to say that it's a CapEx sprint and there's going to be some people burned. Like, it's completely fair. So you have to be really cautious about who you're jumping behind, understanding what architectures they're using, what data centers they've actually got, because the devil is in the details with this one. People just think, oh, more data, more compute, you've won. It's really not the case.
All right, so I'll finish off with a final question that you'll probably struggle to answer, because it's talking about the future. But how do you see, I guess, the next few years unfolding in this space? Everyone's talking about the Mag 7. How are you looking at that particular part of the market? And then obviously there's huge amount of opportunities underneath that no one's looking at as well.
Yeah, look, I think that's the key point. The first key point to realize on this is no one can predict the future. You never know how these things are going to work out. So it's foolish to make predictions. You have to keep an open mind. You have to follow the story. Charlie provides some really great technological insights that I would never be on top of, but it helps broaden the story and make you think what's actually happening, because when you know that, you can try and work out ways where value will accrue. Where's the value going to accrue? For example, if NVIDIA is pushing the adoption of AI, what other companies benefit from that? What suppliers benefit from that? Are there consultancy firms that can benefit from that? So value accrues in a trend, in fast-moving trends in really interesting ways. You think of the internet before it, there's a heap of companies made, someone like Cisco Systems went ridiculous returns because it was there at the start. So the exciting thing for us is we're pretty much here at the start. We just need to try and work out, to a degree, not predict it, but follow the story and try and work out where value is likely to accrue, and then try and find interesting picks in a portfolio of stocks and keep on following the story. So I think that's the way we're playing it. It's not like pretending we know everything about this stuff or where it's going to go, but keeping an open mind, like not trying to say is NVIDIA in a bubble or not, but understand the story of NVIDIA is showing an important sign elsewhere. And you can find that in all sorts of different earnings reports. You can see little clues. If you follow the stocks, you can find little clues in where revenue is growing, where earnings are growing. What does that mean? And if you do that enough, you can start to piece the dots together and lay down some decent bets. And look, my whole career has been built on the idea of finding asymmetric opportunities, where the upside is a lot greater than the downside. And I think this is one of those things. How the pathway it takes, no one knows, but it definitely, if I'm going to say 5 years from now, we'll be using AI in our everyday lives. Companies will be using different tools of AI. AI itself will have got better and better. They'll be used for more things. Biotech's an area we looked at recently with AI. It will provide a lot of advantages to society as well. Like, it will make healthcare more efficient. It will take a lot of admin burden that just weighs down companies. It could make the whole stock market a lot more efficient as well. There's flip sides to that, of course, with jobs, but it could make earnings on a wider scale more attractive for a lot of different companies that don't even have anything to do with AI. So I think that's the exciting part of it, and the thing that we're sort of paying attention to and keeping in mind that this is a real thing. And once you internalize that, then it's just an exciting thing to follow and try and find the opportunities.
Absolutely. Charlie, final thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I'll go on a different tack rather than trying to pick the economy, because no one can pick that. I mean, look at Cisco. Everyone was talking about that as the classic example of the .com. That had a long way to run before it was anywhere near where we are now. So I will bow out of that one. But in terms of what is looking ahead for AI in the future, there's the two bottlenecks of data and the bottlenecks of hardware, right? And at this point, the hardware is still, doubling every couple of years, now less than that.
And when you say hardware, you're talking about the stuff that
NVIDIA deals in, exactly,
the
GPUs. So the GPUs at this point are still flying. But the data is the point where we're seeing the scaling kind of drop back, so there might be some issues with that. But what we're imagining in the future essentially is AI that can be your assistant in everything, right? We're not talking about AI replacing jobs, although it will be obviously replacing many jobs in various sectors, but we're talking about every job being made more efficient because you've got someone on the side who has all of the information.
So would I be able to say, Siri, can you pick a stock for me that's going to go up 100%?
I'm saying that you wouldn't even be talking to your phone like that in the future. You'll just be doing your work and it will be knowing what you're doing, right? The conversation will be far less, I want you now, come back to me now. It'll just be constantly there, constantly doing work that'll be
So it will be looking at you, Greg Canavan, stock picks in the past and learning what you look for, and it might throw up an idea. Hey, Greg, here's a
filter system.
Yeah, here's a stock with earnings per share growth and a low book value of this. Here's 5 stocks I came across this week that might interest you.
Yep.
And that's just, imagine the amount of time that takes you now to do. And that's looking at financial data, looking at ASX reports, earnings announcements, everything. It can condense all that and provide you with the kind of things you look for based on your previous results, and it will learn as it goes as well, based on what you do with that information.
For sure. Humans are so myopic when we look at intelligence because we see nothing else around us that has anywhere near our intelligence. But we are producing things that are going to be potentially many thousands of times more intelligent than us. And so it's very hard for us to visualize that. It's kind of like, what's the distance to the sun? It's really hard to pick that.
Yeah.
But we're talking about potential things just from physics and scaling what we're doing currently that will be many, many times more intelligent than us. And however that plays out is anyone's guess.
Just on that note quickly, there's this concept going around of AI agents, where little packets of programs that are AI driven that just deal with each other online and do stuff. So you could imagine a company that might have very limited human, you say a vending machine company, it might have an AI program that runs that whole thing. It monitors the stock, it orders the supply, person comes and packages the vending machine, it pays the suppliers, it works on a certain way. It might even look for better deals and discounts because it's being given a goal of profit maximizing this vending machine. So you've got this concept of AI agents all interacting online and dealing with each other and doing decisions for us in the background even. We might not even know about them.
They call it APIs eating the world.
API,
application programming interface. So it's just a bunch of different companies, different programs just interacting all the time. It might help something like digital currencies as well. Cryptocurrencies could be in the future.
There's a segue to digital
Well,
currencies.
we don't have time for that.
We will talk about that in the future though.
Finish on the idea of intelligence. The major breakthrough of what actually started this most recent generation of AI boom was Demystify, the CEO and founder of Google's DeepMind, which is their complete cutting edge AI. He was a computer scientist. He used to make games back in the day, but he was also did neuroscience, right? And he thought, hey, what if I combine these two specialities? And he came up with neural networking. He was part of a team, but he was the main push. That kind of spurred the latest gold rush. So if you think about AI combining other specialties, whether it's physics and economics, there's been studies we've looked at. Topology of finance has come out with these papers where AI is coming out with these new theories. So AI will be crashing together disparate parts of human knowledge and creating new and magical things. So there's a lot that we'll be experiencing in the future. I have no idea.
Very exciting and also somewhat terrifying.
But, combination.
Boys, that was a really enlightening conversation. Really enjoyed your insights, and we'll have to meet again and discuss the next chapter down the track.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.